Chris Kennedy and I need to sit down and have a conversation on the sequel to Into the Light, which is sort of sitting there, and I need to get with Tom to get a call to insurrection back off the sandbar. That is so totally on us, not on Tim. But, it's just, And that's the other problem with collaborations, especially when the people involved have multiple projects of their own. Because once you get out of phase, getting back into phase is really difficult. And when you have somebody who insists on, falling on his face on cement floors and then getting sick, it doesn't really help. And I've discovered that I don't get through viruses and stuff as readily as I did 30 years ago. Okay, they take a bigger toll when I get sick. Not just in, how do I get well again? But it's kind of like, well, you know what? I'm not quite as well as I thought I was because my energy level is still really down and so forth. And the kind of cascade of health problems that I had were destructive to my creative process, because it's like anything else, you get out of training if you don't do it. And that's been an issue that I think is trending towards an end. But clearly I could see while I was trying to figure out exactly where I wanted to go in Constantinople that it was still an issue, because I knew that what I was originally thinking about wasn't working. But instead of sitting out there and going, that's what I need to do, I kept sort of skittering on the ice. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not sure how much of it was my trying to make my original idea work after I'd realized that it wasn't working. Right. And how much of it was just that I didn't have the production mechanism in place where I needed it to be. The product that's coming out is good. It's very good. It's just taking me longer to produce it than it ought to. And I think that's getting better. I got almost 9,000 words the other day, but then I had like 2 or 3 dry spells on either side of it. So the average is probably closer to 3,000 words a day, which is only about half of my usual base output when I'm working on a book. So that's kind of where I am right now. But like I say, I think what I've done is good. It's kind of like the short fiction that I've been doing in here, like Heart of Stone for the LibertyCon anthology, and short story that I did for Rob Hampson's Founder Effect anthology, which I also like a great deal. Let's put it this way, the story for LibertyCon, I got an email from Tony. She said, I'm reading the stories for LibertyCon. I haven't gotten through the first page and I'm already crying. Damn you. Well played. So, okay, that worked. But, it's... when talking about writer's voice, I think a big part of any writer's voice is how they approach major emotional crises points, not just for their characters, but for their readers. Okay, how do they communicate that emotion, that feeling to the reader? And I really think that that's a make or break point for a lot of writers. Either they can do that, they can make the characters' emotions, they can make the mood of the scene accessible to the reader, or they can't. Okay. And when somebody calls me or sends me an email and says, I couldn't finish the book, I was crying too hard, I go, okay, that worked. But I'll tell you this too, a good writer is not immune to the emotions that he puts into the scene himself.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see the original Romancing the Stone movie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Sharon Stone, she finishes the book. God, that's good. And she's used up all her tissues, and everything else. The writer who wrote that scene knew what he was talking, or she knew what they were talking about. It works that way. And that's why when I couldn't remember writing that first chapter of Into the Light, why when I read it aloud in its entirety for the first time, I was going like I was being Sharon Stone. I was like, I don't know how to tissue.
This guy knows how to write.
Yeah, either that or he just stumbled up against something here. There are. I've said this before. I think of myself as a craftsman rather than an artist. I think of storytelling as my craft and my writing as the mechanism through which I tell the story. I don't think of myself as a literary artiste who is going to, tweak and have the perfect language and so forth. I think my feeling is that when you reach a point where the reader is concentrating on the style too heavily and appreciating the style, saying this is beautifully written and so forth. And it may very well be beautifully written. But all too often that winds up distracting from the story, which is what I'm all about. Okay. Now there have definitely been writers who could combine them both. I think Roger Zelazny was one of the greatest stylists in the English language. And his style always pushed the story along. Okay. Now, there are individual scenes in my books that I am extraordinarily pleased with from an artistic perspective. But that's almost incidental to telling the story and communicating those emotions, those feelings. I love the English language. I really do, warts and all. Okay, I love it. And I love using it. Especially in my writing. But to me, that's kind of like using the musical score in a Hollywood play. Okay, the musical score supports the play all the way through. If it's a musical play, it's an integral part of it. It paces. It provides an emotional input and it has to be done carefully and subtly to make it work. Okay, but the events of the story are what's happening on stage. Do you see what I'm saying? And to me, language, the written language, is a way of getting you to those events that are happening on the stage, and getting beyond that into why those events are happening on the stage. Okay, what is pushing these people to do what they do? Okay, and when I hit something that I've done, like that first chapter of Into the Light, and I go, oh God, I say, okay, fine, okay, the craft worked there, but there has to be a story under the voice, under the style of the storyteller. And you have to play fair with the story while telling it. But I have read books, novels, short fiction, in which when I got done, I realized that the elbow was connected to the shin bone in the story. But the writer had carried me past it so well that I hadn't realized that Frankenstein got his parts in the wrong place putting the monster together. You know what I'm saying? That's an example of somebody who has a very, very strong voice.